Hello, hello. Welcome to episode 8. Now sporting a flashy new intro graphic and sound. So we've really made it in this show and progressing into professional territory, I would say, as we kind of come along. But we've got Brent and Raju again with us, and I'm Tejas, of course. And let's dive right into this week in privacy. I think first up is the IMF, International Monetary Fund, posted this. I guess it wasn't really like a decree by any means, more of a thought provoking or maybe something that they're looking at, but basically looking at web history impacting your credit score. And so I believe the author or the head researchers line of reasoning was that credit scores might be a little antiquated. It's hard to build credit if you have no credit, and there's other indicators of credit worthiness beyond, I guess, traditional methods that are generally used by big three credit reporting agencies. But then, opening that up, very slippery slope, just like with most of this privacy stuff is. They want to look at browsing history, purchase patterns, things along those lines in order to build out a credit profile. I would say this is pretty similar to maybe the Chinese social credit score, without maybe as many consequences of it. But what did you guys think of this idea of non-traditional factors affecting someone's credit worthiness?
Where does this end is the first question that comes to mind. And frankly, I don't know if it is a good idea. I doubt it. But, then you get into the territory of tracking the users. There are other aspects. Then you get into the education factor. I'm sure they probably look into that, the education of the individual before determining their salary. And then there are 100 different aspects that will come into play. So, and that basically leads to one thing, which is surveillance, which means you're really surveilling the individual to get as much information as possible for something like a credit score. You have to question the fundamentals of that. So yeah, I don't believe this is a good idea.
All right, let me give myself the close up here. I don't like this idea at all. I'm sorry. Raj, you said it right. When does it stop? Where's the line? Do companies know where the line is and know where to draw it? Do we have to watch what we're searching just because we don't want to affect something like a credit score just because we're searching and we're doing some sort of we land on a page and that's going to be held against us or something? Because it's probably not going to be, give us credit for it. I'm guessing that most times, you're looking for things to take the score down as opposed to improve it. So I don't like this at all. I think this is a terrible idea. I know, there are certain industries where they do, or they're starting to do this, like insurance. You could be, I don't know, if you search on the wrong thing, all of a sudden you're going to get hit for 10%. I don't know. I don't think this was as well thought out. I think this is once again the addiction, the kind of the sign of data addiction and trying to get as much data and not really thinking out what should or could be done with it. I don't know, you guys. This is one of those I really don't like.
I mean, on the even from the financial aspect of it, outside of the privacy realm, I mean, all they really want to do is increase the amount of credit someone can apply for, which I don't think there's a shortage of credit going around in the world. There's so much money flying around. So it's like the fact that we're even thinking about how can we get more money and print more money and put it into people's hands. It's just kind of crazy that they're going to come up with other schemes completely outside of the privacy topic altogether, more on the economics of it.
It almost becomes like, a way to control people beyond just getting their data. I mean, first you're getting our data. Now you're using that to try to control us to a certain extent. I sound like one of those cranks or something, but I really don't know where the line is drawn when you start getting to this level, and it is something that makes you pause, at least me, for that.
Yeah, I think a limited upside and a lot of downside, because ultimately these, in order to get the data, you got to get it from somewhere, which means someone's collecting it and someone's selling it. It's not like you're just offering it up for free. And we'll talk a little bit more about where that data is kind of coming from in our deep dive this week. But next up, a big article that kind of came out There was two on Microsoft, but I think the first one earlier in the week was about PowerApps. And so PowerApps is kind of Microsoft's low-code platform where citizen developers and IT people can build applications on their platform. And it turns out that something close to 40 million, 38 million here, users' data was exposed by PowerApps. And so this isn't so much of I would call it a data leak. I thought it really blurred the lines because the reason for this data being exposed was more of, from my understanding, poor user interface design in terms of how applications are built and distributed on their platform. Because they enable people who are generally not as technical as a full-time developer to build apps, some of the defaults or some of the way the settings were worded enabled that a bunch of these applications were left to be publicly exposed that anybody could access it. And these apps, like, there were health data in there was COVID data in there, and a lot of other things. And so yeah, I mean, sometimes it's not even a data leak or any kind of hack or anything that happens. It's just, bad design that somehow ends up exposing customers' information or users' information completely unknowingly, right? You don't know if the company you're doing business with has an application built on this platform and what security measures that they've taken in place. You have no idea. So, yeah, I don't know. This one's a toughie. What do you guys think?
Sometimes it is intentional design, sometimes it's unintentional. In this case, I'm assuming it's an unintentional consequences of a bad design. Very often you see this on the website. When you go to a website, they have a good prominent button that says click here, right? But that prominent button is the one that says, track the hell out of me. But the one that is really hidden is actually the one that is, that the user should really click. But that is not prominent. In that case, it's an intentional design where they are misleading the users about on clicking the wrong button, or at least from a user's point of view. And in this case, I assume that is the case where simple design might leak a ton of information. In fact, this morning there is another leak from Microsoft where I think they lost the primary keys of thousands of their customers, and in this case, we're talking about major customers out there. It goes back to even a broader point. In the internet, in the context of internet and whatnot, and I believe we are centralizing the decentralized internet, and that's not a good thing. And this is happening across the board. This is happening at the network layer with the backbones. This is happening with the hosting providers, or in this case, the so-called cloud platforms, Microsoft, Google, of course, AWS and whatnot. It is happening at various other levels, like the application level. So the centralization, and of course, you see that, and we discussed that in the past in the context of DNS and various other. So the concept of centralizing all of these in a decentralized world will hit us bad. And this is another example where you have millions of users of data that is being exposed. That is what happened with, what was that, Experian, right? Well, you centralized all the credit score data. Well, surprise, right? And you see that as a consequences today, we have centralized, manufacturing of semiconductors. Well, we are seeing the consequences of it throughout the supply chain. We are centralizing the battery production, and 90% of the batteries come from a certain region. So again, all of this we have moved to a centralization model, which is not a good thing. And you're giving up a certain things, which is ability to survive with when there are some disruptions. Like we see that today. California fires, right? Well, they are affecting the breweries in Texas, in Austin. Why? Because they are dependent on that network. Same thing in Midwest, we see farmers selling cows because there are fires there, because they are dependent on them. So we are with the broader concept of globalization and whatnot. We have centralized too many things without looking at the repercussions. I know I'm going much broader here, but this is just one example of such centralization. Internet, one of the powerful aspects of internet used to be decentralization, but now we are centralized. What happens when there's a vulnerability in a central system? Just like we have seen with Experian, We are seeing with Microsoft, and we're going to see a lot of those moving forward.
I'm just going to pick up on this whole idea of even if you have the best of intentions, it feels like in today's world, because we're so interconnected and because everything is kind of scaled up, and you have sites where upwards of 2 billion folks are actively using a site every day. So even if you have the good intentions, let's say that you do your testing, but you can't test with 2 billion people, so you roll something out with the best of intentions, and immediately there are people out there who spot the flaws, spot the issues, and are able to exploit the issues. And so that's what's I think we're seeing more and more of that, because as Raju just said, a lot of things are centralized now, and you kind of couple centralization with mass scale and being able to reach billions of people. Well, your best intended idea could wreak havoc. What's that saying? The roads to heaven or hell are paved with the best intentions, or something like that. And I think you're seeing some of this play out. And when the flaw hits, it doesn't affect a couple of people, or a couple of hundred people. It literally can affect a couple hundred million people within a blink of an eye, and now it's out the gate. So I think, yeah, this is something that it's not really central just to privacy, but it's so important when it comes to privacy that things are handled in a much more tighter fashion, that things are tested more thoroughly, and maybe open up the testing to a broader set of people before you throw something out to billions of people.
That point you made, Brent, on once it's out, right? What happens then? The key thing is nothing happens, right? That's an issue. That's a fundamental issue. So, which means there is no accountability. What happened to Experian? All of us, all of our data probably is up there. What happened to Experian? What each of us were paid $2, $3, something like that, and then back to business again. So the implications, and who is really paying the price? It is the consumer. The ones that are leaking the information are back to it again, and then it's like a slap on the wrist, if that, and it's like they lose the data. They say, "Oops, sorry," and then they move on. So to some extent, that part, "Oops, sorry," is part of their business model, and that has to be approached by the governments, and that is where laws like GDPR are important, and a lot of countries are going down that path, and US also has to embrace this.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's just a cost of doing business, right? Like you were saying with the Experian thing, a couple dollars here and there that you may get back. Um, I think the lawyers kind of make out with like bandits on that situation, and then even you could pay me $2, you could pay me $200. I don't think that really covers the amount of like long term issues I might have to deal with in terms of my data being out there. Let's say you get some identity theft. It's not like Experian is really going to be here like, oh, we're the ones that leaked your information and now someone else took it and pulled lines of credit on your name. Oops, here's our Experian premium product you can subscribe to for $100 a year that will protect you in the future, right? And will protect you against leaks that we made, right? Like it doesn't make a lot of sense in that regard. But that's exactly what they did. They offer like 1 year of their little privacy service for free, and they think that that's the I guess all that matters, right? Same thing we were talking last week about T-Mobile offering that Norton, identity protection service for 2 years for their customers. It's like, cool, you cut a deal with Norton, you probably got that for, pennies on the dollar as a bulk deal. And then, you come out a lot ahead versus having to pay out customers for their troubles, right?
And if you went through the process of the free thing that they offer, and I clicked on that link and then tried to go down that path to see, they wanted more information.
They got to verify you. They don't know for sure if you're the one whose data you're saying you got leaked.
And they send me that link, and then they want, and I say, there's no way I'm giving them additional information.
So, I mean, if we don't want to give them more information on the Experian side than what we were talking about earlier about the IMF credit score, how do we come up with like credit worthiness that's not based on, I guess, current way? Is there any like solutions off the top of your head that you have in mind, or it's just kind of like we got to collectively think about it, and it is something we should find an answer towards, or at least have more people asking the question.
Yeah, I think there are some fundamental issues with credit score itself that has to be addressed. In other words, a credit score basically measures how you spend or how much you spend and how you pay back and whatnot, right? It's not necessarily, let's say you don't use credit much, you just pay cash and whatnot. Your
Yeah.
credit score is going to be zero. So which means does that mean you're not credit worthy?
Yeah,
So there are
exactly.
some challenges there. So it looks at your history and try to predict the future.
Not very good. But speaking of predicting things, I think that's a good segue into our last This Week in Privacy topic on Netflow data. So this was, I think, a highly underreported story. It came out on Vice, but I didn't really see it pick up in a lot of other places. But basically, man, Netflow data is a complicated thing, but basically it creates kind of like a picture of traffic flow, I guess across a network, so it can show like which server communicated with another server or information that is available over or by the server owner or from the ISP, something along those lines. And basically, you kind of get an idea of what type of traffic people are looking for, where people are connecting to, and you just have access to, I guess, carrier level or backbone level flows of information. So you know that there's a massive chunk of information going from this server to that server, so from households to Netflix or something along those lines. But did you guys get into this article and see a little bit more? It was a little bit more on the technical side, I would say, in terms of how this whole thing kind of plays out.
The moment I looked at it, I was freaked out because Netflow has a ton of information. In fact, if you go back to Netflow, Cisco introduced this protocol, I think in late 90s or so. And this is basically to analyze the data, and based on that, it gave network administrators to see where the traffic is flowing, if there are any devices that are transmitting traffic they should not be, and analyze that data, right? It is a Cisco protocol, and there are very similar protocols that have come up, like Juniper introduced JFlow, HP introduced SFlow, and whatnot. Same thing with Huawei and whatnot. But the context is similar. What Netflow really provides is information on where the traffic is coming from, which IP address the traffic is coming from, and where it is going, the destination IP address. It also gives you information on the type of data, like UDP, TCP, and whatnot. But it also gives information on the port. So, for example, if you're browsing the web, it uses a certain port 80, or if you're using secure, it uses a different port. If you're sending out an email, it uses a different port. So there are these various ports. All this data is actually captured in Netflow. So which means looking at that Netflow metadata, that information, you can tell from where it is originating and the destination. When you have an IP address, you can do a reverse lookup and you can easily know which sites you're visiting. And then the source, your IP address from where you're browsing, is included in there. And then what kind of traffic? Is it Zoom traffic? Is it email traffic? Is it some other traffic? All that information is captured in Netflow. That is the essence. And Netflow is available in almost all devices, or at least Netflow or Netflow equivalent. If they're doing Netflow, I assume they're doing SFlow and JFlow and all other protocols. Which means at the network level, they are tracking this. So they know the IP address, so which means, because I'm sure the data brokers have the information about the IP address for every individual, every household out there. And which means they can, because they know the target, the destination, where the traffic is going, they can probably pull together, do a reverse lookup, pull together all the websites you've been visiting, and what kind of apps you've been using and whatnot. And then when you visit, how much traffic you generate, all of that is in there. And that's really, really, really scary. So when you have this information at the network level, now you combine that with a few additional things at the DNS level, at the browser history level, and tie it to an individual. You can pretty much know all the sites you're visiting, everything you're doing. Of course, there are some security aspects to it, but that doesn't cover the IPs and whatnot. So that's a scary piece of information that they are putting together, and it is only coming out now. But I'm sure these guys have been doing it for a long time. Yeah, this is scary, frankly, and they should not have access to this data.
And then sell it.
Sell it.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know much more I can add to that other than I noticed, and I think we talked a little bit about how some of these big guys, the FANG guys, all of a sudden are starting to try to extend kind of their own kind of network capabilities. You got all these devices that are running in your home network, and then extending it out to your kind of your neighborhood. And now you kind of understand, why they're trying to do certain things. It's once again, it's all about how much data and information they can get, and then how they can tie it all together. Now there's the first party usage of it, but then the thing that scares me the most is the third party. Like, all right, now that we've got all this data, hmm, should we sell it? We don't need to sell it in a lot of instances, but hey, it's like free money. We've got the data. People want the data. It's a slippery slope. It's like this whole conversation that's been one huge slippery slope from browsing. They're going to be checking on what you're searching or the pages you land on, and now they're not only getting that level data, but this Netflow thing adds like a whole other layer of data, and there's so many layers and there's so much data, and if you're really start smart about stitching it together, it's like that's the key to this whole thing right now.
And the challenge really, if you notice, is the business model of what I call as a double dipping. They make
Hmm.
money in on one side and from the customer, and then they try to figure out other ways of making money. And at least the first case the customer knows, in the second case the customer doesn't. For example, take a service provider. You're paying your service provider for the service, like the internet service, and you're paying them, you know about it, and the service provider knows about it, and there's a transaction. What the customer may not know is some of the service providers take this data and sell it to the data brokers and whatnot. So that is the second side to it. And that is the second way of making money. And the real issue is the customer doesn't know that this is happening. And the customer doesn't have an option to either opt in or opt out for this service. That is the issue. That is the issue across the board. That is the issue with third-party cookie tracking on the website. That is the issue with service providers. That is the issue with like the credit scores we were talking about, where Experian is providing one service on the credit score and then they are selling your data elsewhere. And that is the issue with, say, payroll providers and whatnot we have talked about in the past, where they are providing payroll as a service and then taking that data and selling it elsewhere. They are coming up with an alternative ways to make more money, and that is not being transparent to the users. And that is really the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could probably do a whole deep dive on ISPs in general, but I mean, first of all, you don't even really get much of a choice in terms of picking your internet service provider in your neighborhood. You'll, if you're lucky, you have maybe two, at best three, but probably one provider that you can choose from. And those prices, I mean, at that point, you're a monopoly into your area, right? Like, I remember at my place about 5, 6 years ago when Google Fiber first started announcing that this was going to be an area. Spectrum came by and was like, "Look, we'll drop our price in half and double your speed," just because they were scared of Google coming in. Which means they obviously have the pricing power to manipulate that number however they want to. And on the flip side of it, let's say there is some disclosure about how they're double dipping on this end. I have no doubt that these guys will come back and say, you know what, if you don't want your data sold, it's going to be maybe $100 a month for internet, and if you're cool with it, it's $50. That's assuming pure transparency on that play, and I'm not sure that even would ever happen because they have no incentive to that. Instead, they can just charge everybody 80, $90 and not tell anyone because they're not compelled to do anything, right?
Yeah, and imagine how things are going to be when something like Starlink launches. There are not a lot of companies out there that can launch 40,000 satellites with your own rockets, right? So, so now we might look back and say, hey, the good old days are better. At least there are 50 service providers or 100 service providers instead of one or two. So yeah, this is gonna get scary. I think one of the things that is silently happening in the background is the the backbones of the internet and are being bought out or laid by some of the big monopolies already out there, which means they control the data flow end to end, and they know end to end about what's going on through the network, right from the browser or right from the device you type with, and to the app you type it in, to the network it goes through, and to the destination, and it is likely that the destination is also owned by that. So that is to the extent that some of these monopolies or duopolies know about you, and that is scary. So as it goes back to my previous point, what is otherwise a decentralized internet is being centralized, and it's not a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into probably our main topic for the week. I think we've hit on a lot of points already that kind of cover it, but ultimately, these data brokers are the ones who are doing a lot of that centralization of the data. And I feel oftentimes, yeah, Wired has a really great article on this that kind of goes a little bit in the weeds on it. That based off of I think a Duke University study that they kind of extrapolated on. But these data brokers, I think most people think of your typical internet giants, Google, Facebook, Amazon, as kind of like your mass hoarders of this information. And they don't realize that there's a whole secondary market outside of those three popular names that are doing this level of data collection, de-anonymization, aggregation of data from multiple sources. And they're often, I would say, kind of nameless companies or faceless companies. They have names, they're faceless. In terms of they kind of lurk in the background and nobody really ever knows that they're existing. If you're lucky, you might spot some from like looking at the amount of trackers on a website, but even then they're pretty smart about how many domains they use and how they switch those up. So you don't actually know where the data is being sent to. It's just some random string of characters. But this Wired article goes through in detail. It talks about two of the bigger companies. I think LexisNexis is a big one. And basically they advertise that they have the ability to determine a person's current location using recent driver's license records. They can track. There was another one, Axiom, ACXIOM, and they say they do location-based user data. Need to know if someone visited a location multiple times in the past 30 days, like a church, a therapist office, or their ex's house. They've got you covered according to the company's marketing document. Just a wild amount of stuff that these guys collect and know exactly at a pinpoint level. And I think this infographic that Brent has up, I think it's from their marketing documents or it's about them in general. But, there's 4,000 of these companies around the world. And, that could span between like, major players versus minor players. But if one and a half of, the 1,500 of the leading brands sell information from store loyalty cards. We talked about this a week or two ago, but like Kroger cards and CVS cards and any kind of loyalty card being additional pieces of information. But on the far right, one of the smaller points, data on 500 million customers worldwide, right? 3,000 data points per person, just like massive scale numbers, right? That completely go under the radar, and nobody would have ever heard of that company. Nobody would know. But these are the people who have all these data deals in place with these ISPs, with these smaller companies, and aggregate a lot of the information and create that, I would say, secondary market. And probably these are maybe Facebook, Amazon, and Google's really true biggest competitors, rather than, we think that they compete with each other, but there's a whole second market that's out there trying to collect and hoard as much data as they can. And I believe the data brokers are the ones who have been, I guess, lobbying pretty hard about Google's Flock, because they're the ones that want to collect the data. And they think if Google turns on the Flock, then that basically will solidify Google's position in terms of the data that they have and not allow the data brokers to collect as much as they want to. So it's I would say a nasty web of stuff going on there. But what did you guys kind of get out of this Wired article? And then I know there's a lot more on the topic of data brokers in general, probably a solid couple deep dives of episodes, just because there's so much that they do. And ultimately all the topics we talked about, I think, feed into this data broker topic in general.
I mean, if you look at that graphic, right, 3,000 data points per person. Do
That's
this
what I was going to
exercise.
bring up.
Do this
That's
exercise and list out the data points about yourself. I don't think
I
we'll
don't know
be
that
able
many
to.
data points about myself, man. I mean, they got 3,000. I could maybe name like 100. This is amazing that they have all this information on us, more than we know about ourselves. That's
That's
scary.
that's exactly the point. And we have touched on the pay stub information in the past, right? 38% of employed Americans information, pay stub information is with Equifax. Again, all of these are extremely scary. Now, if you look at the data brokers on one side and then Google, Facebook, and whatnot, I see Google, Facebook, and all Amazon, Twitter, all these companies as vertical integrators. They have the data part just as much as the data brokers. In fact, the data brokers will be happily selling their information to these companies, and I'm sure there are seamless flow. May not be bidirectionally, but there's a flow there between the data brokers and these surveillance companies. And make no mistake, the surveillance companies themselves are data brokers, right? And actually, all of them are the surveillance companies essentially. But if you look at these, Google, Facebook, and all these companies, on top of that data aggregation, they have also, built applications on top of it, and applications and then of course operating systems, browsers, and then the devices and whatnot. So to some extent, from an end user point of view, these companies are known as consumer application companies, but essentially what they do is just analyze all this information at the back end and serve ads. So to some extent, you can even say these are data brokers masquerading as technology companies or application companies or whatever. And that's what it is. And then there are pure play data brokers. These are the ones that collect information from a lot of sources, and they don't try to masquerade as anything. They know what they do, and they just stick to it. I think that is the difference between the two. And they are the data brokers collect a lot of information and they sell it to each other, and it is all free flow of information. And one thing that happens is even there that industry it has hundreds, maybe thousands of data brokers, because it is also there is also specialization there. We have data brokers that are specialized in the real estate market, data brokers for financial market, and whatnot. Of course, there's if you look at the credit and whatnot, then that's an ocean itself. So there is the specialization within that, and it really goes deep.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop that up because there's this one article that actually talks about it, 18 industries that data brokers are focused in on. But I'm gonna go. Let's see. I want to go back to another piece here, but I don't want to like have a whole bunch of. All right, now I got it. All right, so I like this graphic because it's very easy to kind of follow what's going on here at a very high level. First of all, I had no idea that this whole data broker industry, it's a $200 billion a year industry. I mean, but then again, when you think about they got 3,000 pieces of data points on each one of us for the most part, I guess it does kind of make sense. 43% of data brokers allow consumers to opt out for free. Oh, that's how nice of them. They allow us to opt out for free. That means 57% either don't allow you to opt out, or what do they charge you for opting out? That's what is that irritating? $79 price for a list of 1,000 people with health conditions like anorexia, substance abuse, or depression. Everything is for sale, folks. If you got a health condition, it's going to be worth it to somebody else to make sure they know about your health condition so they can sell that to somebody else. $89 average value of one email address over time. 80 just
So
for one email address. That's amazing.
so
That's
how
a
much
great
did
deal.
it?
You're buying 1,000 for $79, and they're worth 89 a pop over time. That's a
So
great ROI.
how
Bargain.
much how much did Experian pay when they leaked our social security information? I'm sure it's not 89.
No, not at all.
I mean, you when you see these kind of numbers, and I just feel it's like a cavalier way that this data is being, talked about, because for them to throw around these kind of numbers, it's people's lives. I mean, people who have health conditions, a lot of folks would rather keep that private. They don't expect to go to the doctor and have to get a prescription filled, or might have to have certain kinds of use certain kind of therapy, and then come out and find out that the guy next door might actually have this information about you because he might have bought it. I mean, it's astounding how big an industry this is.
Look at it at multiple levels and multiple layers, right? Earlier we talked about data brokers, or in the context of network. They're at the network level, they're analyzing all this information and they have that information out there. They are also collecting this information at the systems level, be it your operating system level, your device level, your whatever device you'll be using, your location data and whatnot is being aggregated there. It is also being aggregated at the application level. And when you say the payroll data, or the websites you browse and whatnot, that data is being aggregated. And if you're using any of the systems, independent of that, your financial information, the payroll data is being aggregated, because again, as we have seen in one of the graphics, 38% of Americans have the financial data in there. And there is bidirectional financial data. That is the money you make through the payroll, and then the money you spend through the credit histories and whatnot. They have that data aggregated on the financial side. The same thing has happened on the properties, the real estate information. There are a lot of companies that aggregated data based on your county property records and the taxes you pay on the property you own. All that information is also collected on that. Same thing, if you are into the education market, and there's a lot of information collected on that front as well. So no matter, and of course there is a health, which is a huge piece, a lot of sensitive information that is all collected. So all the key aspects of these pieces of data, you may think something is trivial, like the order you make at a restaurant. Well, that is one among 3,000 data points they collect, because they know your taste. And so I call this sensory surveillance. They have a better sense of your senses than you do. So they collect all of these pieces of information and aggregating it, and they are doing it at every level. And that is the scary part. And the thing is, they are doing it in a lot more advanced way, and we may not even know to what extent this is happening. And like, take the Netflow thing we discussed. It just is leaked that they are doing it, but we don't know how long they have been doing it to. What else are they doing? In other words, these companies have built the operating system of surveillance, and they are aggregating all that piece of information across the board, and they're doing it globally, and nobody knows the depth of the information they have.
I mean, I think that's on purpose. That's why they stay in the shadows in terms of collecting the information and having these, I don't want to call them, backroom deals, but essentially that's kind of what they are, right? They're finding a way to double dip in a lot of cases. And it's not like they need to market to customers, because customers are just willingly giving up their information. I guess we're not even customers or users. We're just really free data points that are going into a system because you're not even aware of what you're contributing to it. I mean, at least one of the graphics that Brent put up said that one company was paying like $8 a month for access to somebody's social media accounts and bank statements. At least you're getting paid for it. I guess that's one good thing. But if they're paying you $8, what do you think? If they're paying you $8, what do you think they're making on you, right? Like, they're obviously making 2, 3, 4x. If they can afford to pay out just a small amount of $8, they're making a lot more. So, yeah, I mean, another thing that pops in my mind when it comes to this kind of tracking stuff that we probably could do a deeper dive on too as well is these Chrome browser extensions that generally get like unfettered access to your entire browsing history and every page you go on. I think like Honey is a big one, and there's a few others that do kind of like shopping deals or insert a coupon or something like that. But in the end, they might have a tie up with that vendor and get some discount, but really it's the amount of data that they're tracking, and you're just giving up, and you have no idea. So
Just look at that comment. That's funny, Jeff Fisher. That's great. Always count on Jeff for something. I wanted to, as you guys were talking, I thought it'd be pretty, kind of throw some information out there on just kind of the basic tactics and technologies that are being used to collect all this data. You got the cookies, everybody talks about. I don't know as many people know about the fingerprinting. Raju, I know you've talked about that before, but maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
Sure. In a lot of cases, you don't have to be browsing or providing your information for your information to be available. You may think you opened an incognito window and you're safe. But what these companies do is analyze other information that is available to fingerprint you and to pinpoint you. What kind of information, right? One, the kind of browser you use. That's something that is very, very relevant. Then the screen resolution, if you're using a monitor and whatnot, that's an additional data point that is pulled together. Then what kind of graphics cards you use, and that information, whenever it's available, is used, and it is pulled through various local means based on the content of the web page you visit and whatnot. And there are cases like the browser sometimes information is not available, but what they try to do is in the web page that you visit, they have some graphic rendering related details embedded on the website, and each browser renders a certain way. Based on that rendering pattern, they are able to get all that information and determine the browser use. So on top of it, there are several other tricks like how many extensions you have on your browser, what kind of extensions you have on the browser. If you narrow these down, there are 20, 30, or tens of such data points out there. When you are able to fingerprint this or get this information, metadata, and pull it together, you'll be surprised that users, or they will be able to pinpoint to you, the user, and of course where the traffic is coming from and whatnot will only help it. They'll be able to pinpoint you to you, the user, even though you may not have been logged in, you may have been on an incognito window or whatnot. And these are all the challenges with fingerprinting, and it's a deep topic in itself. But because they are gathering all this information, each of this information is one among those 3,000 data points they are talking about. What kind of extensions you have on your computer is one of those data points out there, and all of this is being pulled together to determine you. So no matter how you try to hide, they are ahead. So they caught you, or all of us, I should say, and they have a lot of information. So it is no longer a cat and mouse game. They're way ahead of the game at this point.
I think one distinction that I guess we didn't go into detail, that 3,000 data point number, one, I guess it's maybe an estimation, but two, 3,000 data points is like the attributes, and then the amount of records per data point is a whole different story, right? So if we talk about maybe resolutions of a screen, right, that's one data point that could have 30 different records stored under it based on every device that I've accessed from, right? Every time I log into a service from a different IP address, maybe they know that, oh, this person's a traveler. They connected to like airport Wi-Fi, twice a week, every single week. So that 3,000 number is like still very small in scale of like the amount of actual, the amount of data actually that they have on you per each one of these, right? So yeah, that number I think underestimates how bad it really is.
Well, look at the number up right before it. Data for 500 million consumers. So that's 500 million people. And let's say that there's 3,000 data points for each of those 500 million people. That's a lot. I mean, I don't have my calculator right now, but that's a lot of data. And then look at the other number right above it: 23,000 servers collecting and analyzing consumer data. And that's going on like every day. So it's not just current data, or there's past historical, there's current, and who knows what they're going to find, because we're creating more data every day that goes on, because we're getting more digital stuff. The one number that's not on here, I forget which article I got this from, but I believe in 2020, every person, on average, every person generated 1.78 megabytes of digital data every minute. Just think about that. And
Also,
just
that
think
number
about, like,
sounds small, but 1 point whatever megabytes of like text data is not small by any means. Like that's a lot of information that you can pack into like a data file for such a small, what someone would think is a small file size, but that's a lot of information per minute.
And some of this information that is collected, that 3,000 data points, in a lot of cases, if you look at 500 million, in a lot of cases, these data points are collected by companies that may not be in that country, which means how will the local governments feel when their citizen information is collected by technology companies that are not from that country and without their permission. And that is the reason we are seeing regulations across the board, across various countries in the world, because they recognize the abuse with these. And yeah, I think we'll unfortunately see these virtual walls go up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like we said at the beginning, data brokers is a deep topic that I think we can spend a lot more other sessions going on, but we're on in about 45 minutes, give or take. And so maybe we'll call it a wrap here and circle back next week for episode number 9. But before I forget, like, share, subscribe, because that is all that really matters. But yeah, I guess have a good weekend and hope you enjoyed the show, and looking forward to many more.
See you next week.